He raised his hand without hesitation, because to him she was just another black woman who didn't know her place. No badge, no robe, no visible power, just gray curls, tired eyes, and the quiet dignity of someone who had seen too much to flinch. But what he didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that she ran the very court he was standing in. The slap echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, silencing the packed room in an instant. Lawyers froze. Jurors stared. And somewhere in the gallery, a pen slipped from trembling fingers. He had no idea the weight of what he'd just done, no idea who she really was, because justice isn't always loud when it enters the room, but when it rises, it shakes the ground beneath your feet. Tell us where you're watching from, and stay with us, because what she did next shook the entire system. The courtroom was packed, tension thick enough to silence even the boldest voices. Journalists filled the back rows, their pens poised like weapons. Attorneys whispered behind folders, and city officials adjusted their ties with nervous hands. It was a misconduct hearing against the city's most controversial precinct, and the stakes were higher than anyone wanted to admit. But, seated quietly in the second row, behind the rows of uniformed officers and smug defense attorneys, was a woman whose presence would soon rewrite the entire day. Judge Aisha Carter. At 67, she was a retired civil rights attorney turned federal judge, known not for theatrics but for precision. She had dismantled discriminatory laws with the sharp edge of reason and held power without needing to flaunt it. Her gray hair framed a face that had withstood decades of injustice, but her eyes, sharp, unblinking, still saw everything. Just a few feet away stood Officer Bradley Hayes, 35, a man whose arrogance entered rooms before he did. Decorated by his department, feared by his precinct, he was known for pushing the line between enforcement and abuse, always skirting accountability. His uniform was immaculate, but his record wasn't. To him, hearings like this were theater, and today he thought he was the star. The gavel hadn't struck yet, but judgment was already watching. Aisha had been invited quietly, a surprise overseer. For the proceedings, her identity kept confidential by the city council to observe the officers unguarded. She wore no robe, no name tag, just a simple black blazer and the kind of stillness that unsettles the guilty. Her silence wasn't hesitation. It was restraint, power withheld. Hayes scanned the room, barely glancing her way, dismissing her as just another member of the gallery. His badge gleamed under the overhead lights, but to Aisha, it looked more like a shield cracking under the weight of unchecked ego. As the hearing began, murmurs from the gallery filled the gaps between testimony and tension. Officer Bradley Hayes stood near the aisle, arms crossed, eyes sweeping the room with that familiar edge of entitlement. When a voice rose, measured, calm, and curious, it cut clean through the chatter. Why wasn't the body cam footage entered into evidence? It was Aisha. Her tone wasn't loud, but it held weight, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. Hayes turned sharply, his jaw tightening. "Excuse me, ma'am, this isn't a Q&A, he snapped, already walking toward her. She didn't flinch. "I'm asking for clarity. That footage contradicts the officer's sworn statement." Her voice didn't waver, but Hayes heard something else. Defiance. Challenge. He didn't recognize wisdom in her eyes. He only saw someone who, in his world, should have known better than to speak. "You need to sit down before I remove you," he barked, standing over her now, hand twitching near his holster. Aisha remained seated, calm as stone. "That won't be necessary," she replied, "but you may want to rethink how you're—" Before she could finish, he struck her. Open palm. Right across the face. Gasps tore through the courtroom like thunder. Papers dropped. Phones slipped. People surged to their feet in disbelief. The sound echoed once, twice, as if justice itself had recoiled. But Aisha didn't cry out. She didn't stumble. Her head turned from the impact. Her eyes closed, not from pain, but from control. She breathed in. Then, with a grace that silenced the room more completely than the blow ever could, she straightened her blazer. No trembling hands, no retaliation. Just quiet, deliberate poise. She turned back to him, locking eyes with the man who thought she was beneath him. And then she spoke. "You just made the worst mistake of your career." The silence that followed her words clung to the courtroom walls like smoke. Officer Hayes took half a step back, confusion flickering across his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Aisha rose before he could. With a calm that was colder, then fury, she walked to the center aisle, her steps deliberate, echoing off polished wood. The gallery watched in stunned awe as she turned to face the bench, not the crowd. She didn't need to raise her voice. Authority wrapped itself around every syllable. "My name is Judge Aisha Carter," she said, her tone firm, final, "and I am presiding over this courtroom and this misconduct review." The ripple was instant. Phones emerged like clockwork. One news reporter whispered, "That's her! Oh my God, that's her!" just as a second crew began filing in through the side doors. The state media had been tipped earlier about something major unfolding. This was more than they dared hope. Hayes's supervisor, a veteran officer with decades behind him, went pale. His mouth opened and closed like he was searching for breath. She wasn't there to testify. She was there to judge the very system that thought her invisible. Hayes stumbled, forward, still stunned. I didn't know," he stammered. Aisha's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in clarity. "That's the problem," she said. "You never ask. You assume. And now you'll answer." A wave of stillness rippled across the room. Every officer who once stood like stone now appeared unanchored. The department's lead attorney leaned in toward his assistant, whispering, with clenched teeth, "We're done." Aisha turned back toward Hayes, who now looked less like an officer and more like a child who had been caught with matches beside a burning house. His arrogance had drained into a pale mix of fear and disbelief. He didn't move when the courtroom door opened again, this time revealing internal affairs, the district ethics committee, and one final figure, his own captain. The captain approached, stopping just behind Hayes. "Bradley Hayes," he said with controlled shame, "you're under arrest for assault, obstruction, and misconduct under review." Without waiting for a reaction, he reached out, pulled the officer's hands behind his back, and fastened the cuffs with a precision that made the whole room exhale. The badge on Hayes's chest glinted under the overhead lights, but this time it wasn't protection. It was exposure. And now the system would answer, gavel by gavel, lie by lie. As Hayes stood handcuffed in the very courtroom he once treated like a personal theater, Judge Aisha Carter stepped forward, not with vengeance, but with purpose. Her calm presence now filled the space that moments earlier had tried to shrink her. She walked slowly toward the bench, her eyes steady, her voice carrying the weight of months, no, years of quiet resistance. For those who are only now paying attention, she began, turning toward the room, this isn't just about what happened today. This is about what's been happening for far too long. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a sealed binder, thick with printed documents and legal stamps. For the past 7 months, I've been collecting sealed affidavits, sworn testimony, and documented complaints against Officer Hayes and members of his inner circle. Excessive force, racial profiling, suppressed body cam footage. The list doesn't stop. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, reporters now live streaming, courtroom staff frozen in place. Hayes's face drained completely. He shook his head slowly. You set me up?" he asked, his voice cracking as fear took over arrogance. Aisha didn't blink. "No," she said quietly. "You exposed yourself. I just gave you the stage." Her words, measured and clean, echoed louder than the slap ever could. And indeed, it was all captured. Every camera in the room had caught the moment from multiple angles. The look on Hayes's face, the snap of his hand, the stillness in her reaction. The image was already circulating online. There would be no edits, no denial, no narrative to twist. Internal Affairs, already briefed by Aisha the day before, was waiting just outside the chamber doors with signed warrants and open cases ready to go. She turned then, her gaze rising to the American flag hanging behind the bench. It fluttered slightly in the room's circulating air, but it no longer felt like a backdrop. It felt reclaimed, real. Her voice now controlled the space where she was struck, and the silence that followed wasn't from shock anymore. It was respect. Sober, overdue respect. What they thought would be another routine day of dismissal had become the start of a reckoning, and the woman they dismissed as invisible had just flipped the entire system on its head, with truth as her weapon. Within 24 hours of the incident, Officer Bradley Hayes was officially suspended, along with 3 fellow officers whose names appeared in the stack of sealed complaints Judge Aisha Carter had submitted. By the end of the week, indictments were filed. The state's Attorney General launched a full-scale investigation, and within days, the entire leadership of the precinct quietly resigned, unable to withstand the pressure of public scrutiny and mounting evidence of systemic abuse. But this wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation, and Aisha knew it. In the weeks that followed, Judge Carter returned not just to the bench, but to the front lines of policy. She launched the Carter Reform Initiative, a sweeping program focused on accountability, transparency, and community-led oversight in law enforcement. The initiative pushed for independent review boards, mandatory body cam policies, and education programs rooted in empathy and de-escalation. It wasn't a press move. It was her life's work continuing, louder, sharper, and more visible than ever. Across the country, her image, stoic, unflinching in the moment she was struck, became more than a symbol. Youth organizations began wearing pins that read, "She didn't flinch." Schools held forums about power and prejudice. A hashtag in her name trended for days, not out of outrage, but reverence. In a televised interview, Aisha sat under soft lighting, her gray curls catching the studio glow. The host leaned in and asked gently, "Why didn't you fight back?" Aisha smiled, calm as ever. "I didn't strike back," she said, "because I didn't need to. I've spent 40 years building something that hits harder than hate. Truth." Later, Long after the noise had died down, she walked past that same courtroom, now quiet, its doors closed. The nameplate that once bore Hayes' name had been removed. The bench stood empty, bathed in the last light of day. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was a reminder, a space waiting for someone worthy to rise, not through fear or force, but through the kind of justice that doesn't shout, but never steps back. Isha paused for just a moment, then continued walking. She didn't need to look back. The message had already been written, in courage, in consequence, and in the quiet, undeniable power of someone who never flinched. He thought his hand would silence her. Instead, it raised a nation's voice. What was meant to be a moment of humiliation became a turning point, not just for a courtroom, but for a system. Judge Aisha Carter didn't need to fight back with fists. Her power was already written in every affidavit, every truth carried, quietly through the years. In that moment, she reminded the world that dignity isn't weakness. It's strength waiting for its moment to rise. Her silence didn't protect him. It protected the impact of what came next. Have you ever been dismissed for how you looked? Not. Who you were. What would justice look like if it had your face? If this story moved you, share it. And if you believe in truth that outlives injustice, stay with us. There's more to come. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story, where justice never begs and silence never wins.